All right, so what we're going to cover here is just some basic grants management and reporting associated with it. What we're going to go through is our GM grant transaction and show some of its features. We'll look at our Grant Master Data Index report, which is all of the Grant Master data. We'll look at our grant line item report. We'll check out our AVC overview report. We'll talk about custom reports a little bit. We'll look at GM Deriver and then how it works on FI posting, how the users will see its functionality. So here we are at our easy access screen. Obviously we've got our grants management folder. We're just going to be tearing through some transactions here. So this is GM Grant, and it's an out-of-the-box transaction. It allows users to plan, budget, identify, and record any and all funding really related to receiving grants. The planning, budgeting, identifying, obtaining, scheduling, performing, and recording of the tasks and activities all related to the grant help you to manage the sponsored programs, and it really just furthers the relationship between sponsors and the organizations, and then can combine their goals and objectives together and help track them a little more efficiently. They also help to differentiate this transaction. The setup of it alone will help to differentiate between eligible and ineligible costs. So incorrect postings will not be allowed to be made on specific grants. So you have a lot less cleanup to do if that's ever an issue. And you can bill and record sponsor amounts and record and report on essentially all related costs associated with the grant, all revenues associated, and just any required statistical information you might run into on the grant. So here we are. This is the main page. This is where the grants are actually entered. You'll see that we've got our statuses up here. We've got deletion indicators, our actual grant number itself. This is an internally driven number. They can be set up to be external if it's not going to be numeric. We've got our grant types. Grant types essentially can decide how the grant itself is going to function. So if it's a G1 versus a G5, that is essentially the DNA and sets up how the grant will work. We've got a recorded sponsor here for the grant, and the sponsor there is maintained in the system as a business partner sponsor just through another transaction, and you can simply tie it to the grants with the number they've got recorded. So our general data for the grant, again, it's just data that's repeated from above from the header a little bit. We've got our name. One cool thing that we have here that's a fairly simple add-on that we did for them, customization, is we have a currency and conversion factor. This client does a lot of global work, so they get currency in a lot of different, from a lot of different countries. And what this does right here is they can record the actual grant amount received in their Danish krone, and or if you were working with euros or whatever else, it does that. And the system takes and records an exchange rate from an internal table, and then the grant value is converted to US dollars. And that exchange rate does change. It stays consistent with what the current exchange rate is. So that's a basic data. Reference data is just grant reference data. They use this to specifically narrow down how their grant is recorded and what type of grant it is, and then this assists in their reporting for what they can apply to the grant, how they will actually execute any of the programs associated with the grant. So this specific client uses a lot of data. This one isn't terribly filled out, but they use a lot of data to follow these grants and to help with their reporting. Additional data one, again, they use this very oriented towards what they do, but they have position details. So if they have a country director they need to apply, they can do that. They can name the country, the region, department. Lots of cool little features. We can apply cost centers on here. These grants have cost centers, and they also have our WBS elements. So they're tied to a project. but the project is their sponsored program. So that's how we have these guys set up. You can see you can take requirement notes or reporting type notes. And we can keep moving. If they have an amendment, they can record amendments here, increases, decreases, extensions, and then it'll apply, and it actually does all the math for you in here. We're going to skip our posting tab. It's not very relevant for this. For our budget validity, you can see that we've got our grant fiscal year variant, our company code fiscal year variant, and then our splitting rule. So it does accommodate both fiscal years. For billing, this specific client, we don't have any kind of billing that comes out of here. We just have manual billing set up for our billing rules. So unfortunately, we can't show you that or anything reimbursable billing or the GM billing report, but it is there, and I'll talk about that a little bit further in a minute. And then on to our dimensions tab. This is, possibly the most important tab on your grants, one of them. I mean, between that and your general data. This has your financing sources. So you've got your fund, and this one just has a single fund and external fund, and then we've got our sponsored programs, and you'll see that these programs are what I was talking about are tied to their WBS elements. So their grant is tied to a project, and then that project is what incurs the cost. So if there was a budget set aside for 20 personnel on 5BO05, the Greater Medidi landscape, if you ran a journal voucher and you plugged in this sponsored program, and then you plugged in a commitment item that was associated with this, you would see that cost hit this sponsored program and go into this bucket. So it would consume X amount of dollars out of that allocated part of the budget. We'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about our derivations. So what we can move on to now is we can move on to our grant index report. And this is a really cool report. It's fairly simple layout. It's not terribly pretty, but it gives you all of the data associated with your grant. So you can run it for multiple grants. You can run it for specific parts of a grant. So if you were looking for grants in a specific award status, you could run it there. It really just displays all of the internal grant master data, just things like creation date, grant status, fiscal year definition, company code assignment, billing info, sponsor info, anything like that. It can show you. So again, it's not a terribly pretty report. It's what we call an ALV layout. So it's an ABOP list view layout. These layouts are very easily exported into Excel. So if you needed to send a report to a superior showing grants or showing grants that were created on these days and what data they contain, what data they might not contain. It's just a good all-around report for reporting on your grants. You can set it up to change the layouts very easily. There's lots of data this grant can report. This is a layout that our user on this client, she uses this a lot just to go and review grants because they receive quite a few. If I go look at one that has most all of that data included into it, you can see really the vast amount of data that you can pull on this report that has to do with all that data that you put in on your GM grant. You'll see here that we did include some A133 information on this report. That's a modification we made to it. This is a standard report out of the box. We just made a few modification changes for them. Pretty quick and simple, just for the client's tracking. So let's move on and let's look at our grant line items. So we just looked at our master data, and we did it in two different spots. We did it in GM grant, and then we looked at this, our master data index report. Let's go look at our grant line item for the same report. And what we'll see here is those specific sponsored classes and programs that we looked at. We'll see the costs that are incurred on them, or that have been incurred. So there's that personnel, and we've got our sponsored program. This is just showing us, sorry. But we've got our sponsored program, our fund, and our grant. So this is that main data from the general tab or our header data, plus the data from our dimensions tab. We've got our fiscal year, our reference stock, we've got our posting dates, currencies, value date, and again, these are interchangeable. You can have different grant or different layouts in here if you're looking for different data. And it's a really great report. Again, it's in this ALV view. It's a grid layout, and it's just dynamic in the sense how the users can create the layout, and if somebody wants to see information for it, how they can set it up and send it off, export it, email it, whatever works, however they're looking to do it. The last report that I've prepared for us to look at is our GM AVC OVRW report. It's a great report because the budget, it's a budget tracking report, and it's tracked per the sponsor's requirement. It can immensely help you on your grant reporting, both internally and externally, and it just is really a cool report to dig into and look at. So here we go. We've got our grant over here on our left. We've got our consumed amounts, and we've got our available amount, and we can drill into our total expenses. We can drill into our revenues too if we needed to, but it's showing us our fund, our sponsored program, and then our sponsored class, and then we can even look down and see at the specific costs incurred on those specific sponsored programs and sponsored classes. So it's really a cool report. It's an easy one to look into, and the great thing again is it's tracked per the sponsor's requirements. So reporting back to them with it it's a great report to use for it. So moving on to that, just to talk a little bit more about reporting, I noticed that you guys had a few questions about custom reports. And although the two previous reports, our AVC OVRW and our line item, are great FI reports that can be used to report to your funders, I did notice you guys had a few other requirements. So if your funders are looking for specific information that they would like to see combined on reports, and we're not just finding it on these SAP standard reports, we can always employ a standard delivery tool. It's called Report Painter. And what it does, it allows you to create reports from data contained in the special purpose ledger application component for GM, and then also it takes in any of the other SAP application components that it would need to reach out to. It can reach out and combine the data to really just meet any specific reporting need. Most of them are the ALV excuse me, layouts, but very easy tool to use, and the users themselves can actually be trained on it to take ownership. The reports are user specific, so it's a great thing for users to learn how to use. A couple of the examples for your reports: your multi-funded, your A133, or your funds that were restricted, unrestricted, permanently restricted, cost sharing. Those are all reports that would be included in here. On the cost sharing is a standard capability in GM grants. So there are other things that we could look at there. Unfortunately, again, these guys don't use a cost sharing setup on this live client, so I can't show you any of those right now. And one last thing to touch on there, just on reporting and billing. The system does accommodate reimbursable billing, like I stated before. Again, we don't have this system set up in an active client that would show you that. So just on the reporting standpoint for reimbursable billing, it's very similar to Report Painter, but the reports are actually small, simple developmental objects that are easily customized specifically for each client. So they're real simple to make and simple to get and put on the ground running. So Grants also does have reporting for more billing and reconciliation. On top of that, we just don't have it set up in this system, so we just can't show you that right there, but the capability is there, and it's fully encompassing. So let's look at our last thing that I was going to take you through with GM Grants. And what this is these are our derivers. So these are our derivation strategies. And what this does is this really allows the user's life to be streamlined. And this is just a pretty cool feature that we like to show off a little bit. So you can see here we've got rules set up. These are our derivation strategies. So our commitment item derives our sponsored class. So if our commitment item falls within this range, from 4 to 4999, it's going to derive this sponsored class. If our commitment item falls in this range, it's going to derive this sponsored class. So on and so forth. Sponsor plus commitment item derives a sponsored class. Grant plus commitment item derives a sponsored class. So these are just different scenarios that might be reached on, posting invoices, doing a journal voucher, just different types of postings that your users might run into. And the cool thing is watching them in action in the system. And so this is just a simple journal voucher. And what I'm going to do here is just plug in some data that I already know and just show you the functionality of those derivers and watch them while they're in motion. So I've entered a little bit of data there. We've got our GL accounts. GL accounts are associated with our commitment items. We'll need a business area for one GL account here. And this is just specifically set up for this client. We can make things different. Our WBS element is our sponsored program, and then we'll put in our grant. So we've only put in a few objects there, and what we'll do is we can hit enter, and we can see the information that it has picked up. If we start scrolling back here, you can see our fund has been entered into both of them. Our commitment item has been moved over and associated. Our fund center has been associated. And then lastly, our business area per that specific funded program. They're funded programs because they're global, have business areas that are associated with them. So that's one way that they like to report on things. So we've got that to driving that in there. So that's just really some cool functionality, some easy reporting, standard reporting delivered from SAP GM Grants. And what we just covered is we went through our GM Grant. We looked at our master data index report. We checked out our grant line item and saw the costs incurred. We looked at our AVC report and looked at the budget and its tracking per the sponsor's requirement. We talked about some custom reports with Report Painter, and that isn't standalone from reports that can be modified. We can modify standard reports. And lastly, we went through our GM deriver and posted a journal voucher to show how those derivers work. Any questions?